She wrote the warning on a Thursday. It was 11 pages, single-spaced, every page numbered and dated, and initialed at the bottom right corner the way she had been trained to initial documents that she wanted to be provably hers in the event that they were later relevant. She had been an intelligence analyst for 16 years, and she had learned early that the documents most likely to become relevant later were the ones you least wanted to need to prove were yours. And so, she initialed all of them as a practice rather than a judgment about which ones would matter. This one she initialed more carefully than usual. Her name was Senior Analyst Vera Dath, and she worked in the Carath Collective Strategic Assessment Division, which was the division responsible for producing the intelligence assessments that the collective's senior command used to make decisions about operations in the Outer Marin and Carath corridors. She had been in the division for 16 years, and she had been its senior analyst for 3, which meant she was responsible for the accuracy of the assessments, and also responsible for the specific quality of unhappiness that accurate assessments produced in senior commanders, when the accuracy conflicted with what the senior commanders had already decided they wanted to do. She had developed, over 3 years as senior analyst, a precise taxonomy of the ways that senior commanders responded to accurate assessments that conflicted with their preferences. There were 6 responses, and she had cataloged them, and she could usually predict within the first 2 minutes of a briefing which response a given commander was going to produce. Admiral Veth Kara's produced response 4, which was, "The analysis is noted, the conclusion is incorrect, proceed as planned." She had briefed him on the Earth assessment on a Thursday morning. He had produced response 4 within 4 minutes. She had returned to her office and written the 11-page formal warning document, initialed it at the bottom of every page, and filed it through the standard channel with a notation that it was a pre-operation descent record, which was the formal designation for an assessment that the senior analyst had submitted after a command decision had already been made, but before the operation had begun. Pre-operation descent records were filed in the collective's standard archive and reviewed quarterly by the Oversight Committee. They were not read by anyone before the operation they were dissenting from. She had known this when she filed it. She had filed it anyway. The 11 pages said, in the language of a careful intelligence analyst who had been doing this work for 16 years, and who understood that the most important quality of a warning was its precision rather than its urgency. The target designated as primary in the operational order is not what the operational order describes it as. The operational order describes a monitoring installation with minimal defensive capacity and a small permanent staff. This description is accurate for the surface-level indicators available through standard sensor sweep. The surface-level indicators are not the complete picture. The 11 pages then described what the complete picture was. It described the monitoring installation's position in the Marin Outer Corridor, which was not a glamorous position and not a heavily strategic one by the standards of the corridor's primary transit infrastructure, but which was, if you looked at the full map of what that position covered, the single most information-dense point in the outer corridor's sensor network. Not because the installation itself was large. Because the installation was the node through which the outer corridor's distributed sensor network reported its aggregate data, which meant that whoever staffed it had access to everything that network could see. It described the staffing, which the operational order had assessed from personnel registry data as 14 personnel. The 11 pages noted that the registry data for this installation had not been updated in 11 months, which was unusual for a conquered installation of any significance, and which was either an administrative oversight or a deliberate choice, and that the specific pattern of which data had not been updated suggested the second option. It described 3 years of the installation's communication logs, which she had accessed through a source that she cited in the document, and whose reliability she rated as high, and which showed a pattern of outgoing communication volume that was inconsistent with a 14-person staff and consistent with something significantly larger. It described what the sensor sweep anomaly readings in the outer boundary of the installation's designated sector looked like when you applied the correct interpretation framework rather than the standard one. It described what she assessed as the actual capability of the installation's defensive capacity, which was not minimal. It described, in the final 2 pages, what she believed would happen if the operation proceeded as planned. She had been as precise as she knew how to be. She had initialed the bottom of every page. She had filed it on Thursday afternoon and gone home and made dinner and sat in her apartment and thought about response 4 and what came after it, which was operation commencement, which was scheduled for Sunday at 600. On Saturday evening, she went back to the office. She pulled up the 11 pages. She read them again, not because she expected to find an error, because she wanted to be certain she had not missed anything, and because the specific quality of sitting with a warning you have already given and cannot give again was something she had learned to treat with the full attention it deserved rather than the partial attention that would have been more comfortable. She had not missed anything. On Sunday at 600, the operation commenced. She was in the Strategic Assessment Division's Monitoring Center, which was where senior analysts sat during operations to provide real-time intelligence support to the command. She had a console, a direct line to the command room, and the specific quality of attention that came from watching something you had been told not to watch the way you were watching it. The operation plan had 3 phases. Phase 1 was approach, during which the collective's 4-vessel strike group would enter the outer corridor and close on the installation's position, using the low-signature approach vector that the operational order specified. Phase 2 was engagement, during which the strike group would disable the installation's communications array and secondary systems before the staff could broadcast a distress signal. Phase 3 was the operational objective itself, which was the seizure of the installation's data archive, specifically the aggregate sensor data from the outer corridor's network that the installation processed and stored. The plan had a projected completion time of 4 hours. Phase 1 proceeded according to the plan. The strike group entered the outer corridor and closed on the installation's position without incident. The approach vector worked. The installation did not respond to their approach. It did not broadcast. It did not activate any visible defensive system. She watched the sensor returns from her console and thought about the 11 pages. At 8:47, 47 minutes into Phase 2, the command room direct line activated. Admiral Karaz's voice had a quality that she had not heard in it before, which was not a quality she could name in the moment, but that she would later describe in the after-action report as controlled assessment of an unexpected situation. He told her, the installation's communications array did not respond to the disruption sequence. She asked, did it go offline? He told her, the disruption sequence completed successfully. The array shows as offline on our sensors. She asked, what is the installation's broadcast status? He told her, no broadcast detected. She looked at her console. She ran the sensor return through the analysis framework she had used in the 11 pages. She told him, Admiral, the array showing offline on our sensors does not mean the array is offline. It means our sensors are receiving a return consistent with offline status. Those are different things. He told her, the disruption sequence is confirmed. She told him, I understand. I want to flag that the installation's communication architecture, based on the source data in my pre-operation descent record, includes redundancy systems that are not on the standard registry. If the primary array is showing offline status while a backup system is routing through a non-standard channel, we would see what we are currently seeing. He was quiet for a moment. Then he told her, the operational order accounts for the standard redundancy systems. She told him, yes, the non-standard ones are in the 11 pages. He told her, hold. She held. She watched her console. The strike group was holding position at Phase 2 completion, which was the standard transition pause before Phase 3 initiation. 4 vessels, standard formation. The installation ahead of them looking exactly like what the operational order had said it would look like at this point in the operation. She thought about what the 11 pages had said it would look like at this point in the operation. The two descriptions were the same. That was the problem. At 9:03, the command room line reactivated. Admiral Karas told her, "We are proceeding to Phase 3. She told him, "Admiral, I want to request a 15-minute hold before Phase 3 initiation to run a non-standard communication frequency sweep on the installation." He asked, "What is the basis?" She told him the 11 pages, specifically pages 7 and 8. He told her, "The Assessment Division's pre-operation descent records are filed. For archive review, they are not operational documents." She told him, "I know. I am requesting a 15-minute operational hold on my assessment authority as senior analyst, which is in the divisional charter as an available action, to run a sweep that will take 12 minutes, and that will either confirm the operational order's assessment or produce data that changes it." He was quiet for 4 seconds. Then he told her, "The 15-minute hold is not authorized. Proceed to Phase 3 on schedule." She told him, "Understood. I am logging this exchange in the operational record." He closed the line. She logged the exchange. She watched her console. Phase 3 initiated at 9:07. At 9:11, the installation responded. Not with what the operational order had described as a minimal defensive capacity. With what pages 7 and 8 had described as the actual defensive capacity, which was not minimal, and which had not been visible in the approach phase because it had not needed to be visible in the approach phase, and which became visible in Phase 3 because Phase 3 was when the strike group moved to within the range at which the installation's actual defensive systems were designed to engage. She watched the sensor returns. She did not speak. There was nothing to say that the 11 pages had not already said. Every development on her console between 9:11 and 9:47 was a development she had described on one of the 11 pages, in the order she had described it, within the timing ranges she had estimated. Not because she was prescient, because she had read the data correctly and the data had described exactly what was happening. At 9:47, the command room line activated for the last time. The voice was not Admiral Karas. It was a junior communications officer she did not recognize, which told her that the command room's senior personnel were otherwise occupied. The officer told her, "Senior Analyst Dath, the strike group is requesting assessment support on extraction options." She told him, "Put me through to the strike group commander." She spent the next 41 minutes working with the strike group's navigator on extraction options. She was precise, and she was fast, and she used the 3 years of data she had accumulated on the outer corridor's sensor network coverage to identify the specific gap in the installation's response pattern that gave the extraction the highest probability of success. The extraction was not clean. It was not the outcome the operation had intended. It was the outcome that was available given what the installation had turned out to be, which was what the 11 pages had said it was. 2 of the 4 vessels made it out of the corridor. She wrote the after-action report on Monday. It took 9 hours, not because the events were complicated, because she wanted to be accurate and complete, and she wanted every finding to be traceable to a specific data point, and she wanted the timeline to be documented with the precision that timelines required when they were going to be reviewed by people trying to understand what had happened and why. The report was 43 pages. On the first page, before the summary, she wrote one sentence. The sentence said, The pre-operation descent record filed Thursday at 16:47 hours described the findings of this report in full. The record is available in the Standard Archive under the reference notation listed in the appendix. She did not write it to say, "I told you so." She was a professional, and she understood that "I told you so" was not useful in an after-action report, and produced the specific kind of defensiveness in the people reading it that made it harder for the findings to be heard. She wrote it because the record should be accurate. The warning had been filed. The warning had been precise. The warning had described what happened. The after-action report was not the first document to describe what happened. It was the second, and the record should say which one was first. She initialed the bottom of every page. She filed the report. She went back to her office and sat at her desk and looked at the analytical files she had built over 3 years on Earth's presence in the outer corridor, the supply depot records, the monitoring network architecture, the communication pattern analysis, the positional data on assets that were not in the standard registry, but that she had identified through the kind of patient cross-referencing that produced information by assembling pieces that were each individually innocuous. She had been building those files for 3 years before the operation. She had built them because accurate intelligence required knowing what you were actually looking at, and what she was actually looking at, when she looked at Earth's presence in the outer Marin corridor, was not what the collective standard assessment said she was looking at. She had said so in the 11 pages. The 11 pages had described what would happen if the operati on proceeded as planned. Everything it described had happened. She thought about the Admiral's voice at 9:03, the 4-second silence when she requested the 15-minute hold, the response 4 that had arrived at 4 minutes in the Thursday morning briefing. She thought about the 2 words that had started all of this, not the operation, earlier than that. The conversation in the command room 3 weeks before the operation, when the Admiral had looked at the preliminary target assessment and had said the 2 words that had sent her back to her desk to write the 11 pages. The 2 words that the preliminary assessment had used to characterize the installation. Easy target. She had heard those 2 words and she had gone back to her desk, and she had spent 4 days going through every piece of data she had on the installation and the corridor and Earth's presence in it. Because easy target was a characterization and characterizations deserved verification, and the preliminary assessment had reached that characterization from the surface-level indicators, and she wanted to know what the non-surface-level indicators said. The non-surface-level indicators had said, not easy, not a target in the sense the characterization meant, something that had been built and staffed and positioned and maintained with the specific deliberateness of an entity that understood the outer corridor's information architecture and had decided, quietly and without announcement, to be at the center of it. She had written the 11 pages. She had been responded to with response 4. Now she was sitting at her desk on Monday afternoon, writing an after-action report that described the difference between the 2 words and the reality they had been applied to. She thought about what that difference had cost. She thought about what it was going to cost going forward, because the after-action report described the current situation, and the current situation was that 2 of 4 vessels had made it out of the corridor, and the installation was intact, and the data archive had not been accessed, and the collective's outer corridor operational capacity had been reduced by half in 47 minutes. She thought about what Earth's response to the operation was going to be, which was something the after-action report did not address because assessing that response was her next assignment, and she had not started it yet. She started it that evening. She started it by going back to the 11 pages and reading them again, specifically the section that she had not needed to write because it was beyond the scope of a pre-operation warning, the section about what would come after if the operation proceeded as described. She had not written that section. She had stopped herself. She started writing it now. It was 4 pages. When she finished, she sat with the 4 pages for a long time. Then she took the 4 pages and the 11 pages and the 43-page after-action report, and she organized them in order, and she put a cover sheet on the front. The cover sheet had one line. It said what easy target means. She filed the combined document in the standard archive under her pre-operation descent record reference. She initialed the bottom of every page. She went home. She made dinner. She sat in her apartment and thought about 3 weeks ago when she had heard 2 words in a command room and had gone back to her desk and had understood, somewhere between the first page of the data review and the 4th, that those 2 words were going to be the most expensive words the collective had spoken in a long time. She had tried to prevent it. She had not been able to prevent it. She had documented it instead, because documentation was what she had. Because if you could not change what was going to happen, you could at least ensure the record was accurate enough that the people who came after would understand what had happened and why. Because the record existed to enable change, and the change could not come from a warning that had not been heard, but it could come from an after-action report that was impossible to misread. She had written the most accurate after-action report she was capable of writing. She had initialed every page. She thought about the 4 pages she had written that evening, the section she had not included in the pre-operation warning because it was beyond the scope, the section about what came after. The 4 pages described, in the language of a careful analyst who had been doing this work for 16 years, what she believed Earth's response to the operation was going to be. Not a military response, not fleet movement or defensive posturing, or the kind of visible reaction that operations produced when they went badly against a capable opponent. Something smaller and more precise than that. The 4 pages described what it looked like when an entity that had built a 900-year-old intelligence network and had staffed it and maintained it and positioned it, and had watched through that network everything that happened in the corridors it covered, decided that a specific collective operation had crossed a threshold that required a response. The response she described was not destruction, not force. The specific, targeted, precisely calibrated removal of the collective's ability to conduct the kind of operation that had just been conducted, through the methodical elimination of the collective's operational infrastructure at exactly the nodes she had identified as load-bearing in 3 years of network analysis. She had described this not because she had information confirming it was happening. She had described it because she understood from 16 years of intelligence work what an entity that had been watching for 30 years and had decided it was time to stop watching looked like when it began to act. And she understood, from the 11 pages she had written on Thursday and the 47 minutes on Sunday, what kind of entity she had been watching for 3 years. Not an easy target. Something that had chosen, for reasons that were not yet in the public record but that she suspected were in documents she did not yet have access to present itself as one. She had written that conclusion on the last page of the 4 pages. She had initialed it. She had filed it. She did not know if anyone would read it before the things it described began to happen. She knew the record would say she had written it. That was the thing about records. They were there when you needed them, and they were there when you did not, and they did not require anyone to read them to be accurate. They required only that someone had written them and initialed them and filed them and made sure the date was correct. She had done all of those things. She had been doing them for 16 years. She would keep doing them for as long as the collective had an archive, and she had a desk to sit at and data to read. She thought that was the correct approach to the situation. She thought it had always been the correct approach to the situation. She had written the warning. She had been right. She would write the next one. If this one reached somewhere the others did not, you know why. It is because of her, not Earth, not the installation, not the 47 minutes or the 2 vessels or the archive that was never accessed. Her 16 years of work, 11 pages filed on Thursday, initialing the bottom of every page because she had learned early that the documents you least wanted to need to prove were yours were the ones most likely to become relevant later. She tried to prevent it. She could not prevent it. She documented it instead, because documentation was what she had. The record was accurate. That was what she could give. Stay human.